Is it Pebeo or Pebeo? The accents above the E's make me think it's Pebeo, but everyone I've heard pronounce it says it Pebeo. I'm going to pronounce it Pebeo. Hey y'all, it's Alex and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be testing the markers that I've kind of been the most excited to test out of this whole series. We will keep this one short and sweet. Every marker in this set is being tested on 3 criteria: the packaging, the swatching, and the drawing. We will get more in depth as we go through each of those sections. Now, without further ado, let's get into the packaging. When I first ordered these Pebeo acrylic markers, I was really concerned that they were going to go the same way as the Amsterdams, where you can't tell what color they are based on a horizontal view, but they have pleasantly surprised me. It's not as aesthetically pleasing to have these in the horizontal stack as the Poscas or the Molotovs are, but it's still better than nothing. It's better than the Amsterdam. I worry a little bit about whether or not these are little stickers that will come off someday, but thus far they've been holding pretty strong. It's probably a manufacturing cutoff. They only have to order one type of plastic, don't need to worry about dyeing it, and then they just have to put an adhesive sticker on it. I feel like the marker itself is a little busy. You do have the brand name, what type it is, and all of the materials you can put it on, but the color name and the number is right here. The paint swipe behind it makes it a little hard to read on cyan, and then the same for night blue. Then you have the description in English, French, Spanish, Italian. I think that's German. I have no idea what this last one is, NL. They do come with their own little nib replacement. I'm tempted to remove these and put them in a little bag because I'm worried how I store them could potentially damage the nibs. Just because of pulling them in and out of the stack could cause these to rub up against other markers. But there's a tiny sliver where I can see through the packaging. Completely unintentional, I'm betting. It's like enough to recover half a point for the sake of seeing the ink inside of the pen. They've got an okay cap. They have a place for you to put your replacement nib so that way it won't get lost, though I'm a little concerned about it becoming damaged depending on how you store your markers. They've got the color name and number, though it's a little hard to see at points. I think the stars is a reflection of the light fastness, though I am not sure. That's usually what it means, though. The pen cap also works as a good way to prevent the marker from rolling. So I think they're going to get a 4 in the packaging department right alongside Poscas. For the swatching section, we're going to be using night blue, so hard to read, and the light blue. It gives a larger dot than I was expecting, but they're actually very consistent. These nibs actually feel, really great. This one is a lot softer than the other one. Let me just switch this one around also to give it the same treatment. Okay, there we go. The nib actually softens up a little bit as you use it, so you will get thicker lines. Now it's time for the layers. This one is really dry. Maybe I need to shake it more again. All right, here's the second layer for the blue. I wish this dried the exact same color that the packaging is, but it is definitely darker. The darker color is ripping up the paper a tiny bit more on the second layer. So there's definitely an opacity difference in both of them. There's some slight shine around the edges of the light blue, and I guess a little sheen difference in the night blue, but it's not the worst swatch in the world. Next is the gesso. We'll see whether or not these can handle a rougher texture versus a smoother texture. The light blue is having a little bit of trouble. I feel like it's turning out really dry, while the night blue is a very juicy marker. For the varnish section, I will be using a high gloss varnish from Liquitex. I usually prefer matte, but I don't have one in a bottle like this in my arsenal. Usually I prefer spray, but I would like to switch to using paintbrush ones. And I like to go back and forth a few times to make sure there's no splotches, and it's already kind of coming up on my paintbrush here. So I've been deeming any color that comes up during the varnish test as a failure, because if there's a white section next to it, you are going to be able to tell if one color starts to bleed. So Pebeos also fail the varnish test. Now to test the opacity, we'll layer over a light over the dark and vice versa. I kind of had a feeling that the light blue wouldn't handle layering over the night blue very well. But let's see. Okay. The opacity still isn't great. In person, I can see some of that lighter color peeking through, so I think this is also going to fail the opacity test, which almost everything has so far, so not the end of the world. Here's a scribble for a sketch in pencil and color erase pencil. Yeah, I can see both through the light blue, and it's smearing the color erase pencil, surprisingly enough. It's not showing through the night blue as well. Let's see how colored pencil lays over it, if it grabs weird. Yeah. I can't build up the opacity I want to see without getting a bunch of weird splotchy bits inside of it. And even when I try to go lightly, it grabs at some parts a little bit more than others. We'll have to use a black for the darker one, which it's actually layering over this half a lot better. It fails the varnish test. It fails the opacity test. It fails the pencils all the way through. This entire row is -1 point, -1 point, -1 point. In the swatching department, Pebeo markers get 2 out of 5 points. Let's move into the drawing section. Every brand in this series has been randomly matched up with one illustration. Those illustrations were also randomly generated. This particular one, it is a mouse girl with a buzz cut who is wearing a Tudor-style gown, a leather harness of some sort, and is holding a beverage or a potion. I decided to go with a little teacup, and she is wearing a choker-styled harness with an O-ring at the bottom. For this one, I really wanted to do a more painterly style of illustration with some blending techniques. We will get into those blending techniques in a little bit. First, I gotta say, I'm not quite impressed with this night blue. There are other navy blues I have that laid down in pretty much one layer with only some minor streaks, but everywhere I went in with this marker, I did have to do 2 layers, and then it ended up having some blotches of shininess. The only marker in this series that I had absolutely no problems with was the Caribbean blue, which is funny because that's the only marker that I almost cut out of this piece. I was considering only having the straight blue colors in this, and I'm glad I ended up including it. The light blue, it's not the worst marker. The light blue just didn't quite wow me in the same way the Caribbean blue did. The Caribbean blue was the only one that didn't actually need 2 layers. Everything else really did, and some parts had a weird sheen to it, but others didn't. For the blending, I focused on the face on really making her eyeshadow and her blush soft. I've been doing this a little bit more recently where I take a really frayed paintbrush and just dot at the edges of really wet paint. And It takes a few times of going back with the highlight, going back with the low light, and getting just the right amount of each layer that you want, but I think it's absolutely stunning. My eye is instantly drawn to her face because of how that eyeshadow looks, and especially being such a big part of her face, it is really important that it stands out. I was a little concerned in the moment that the blush was too dark, especially with the fact that I was trying to go for, this is a Tudor portrait, and in most Tudor makeup you've got the white face with a hint of rouge on the cheeks right at the apple. I should have probably concentrated it a little bit more around just the apple of the cheek instead of continuing it up onto the nose, but I am a weak person and I really like continuing the blush across the nose, kind of more like a sunburn blush. That's at least how I usually think of it. With having a very limited color palette for these markers, I was kind of at a bit of a loss for what to do with the steam, so I just decided to use a colored pencil to do some lines. For every marker in this series, they're going to be getting Posca pens for the line art, just to give everybody a fair chance and give everybody the same treatment. I thought about doing a lineless style for this one, but I think it really did need the line art, especially on the eyes, to pull it together. The most tedious part of the line art was actually the lace. I really wanted to include a lot of fine details instead of just kind of having it be some big blocky shapes. And then wherever it was hidden behind the steam, I wanted to be done in a blue marker. I feel like I still need to work out how steam works in my style. I'm curious as to what you guys think. I feel like it's not quite the best that it could be. Like everybody in the series, she gets her white outline and the smattering of stars in the background because all sparkles are great. But unfortunately, this marker did creep under the washi tape, which even some of the cheapest markers in the series didn't do. As much as I love this final piece and the gradients I was able to get from using a paintbrush and a stippling motion, I'm disappointed by how much it snuck under the edges of the tape, and also how the cyan color has this weird opacity. And the sky blue also has some spots where I don't think I went over it enough times. So as far as using it in the piece, I'm gonna have to give them a 3. I think I'm gonna have to put the total up above because it's out of room. So out of a possible 15, 7, 8, 9. These have received a 9, putting them at 3rd overall behind Posca and Molotow. So here is the current lineup. In the number 1 slot, we have Posca pens, followed by Molotows, the Pebeo acrylic markers, Liquitex, Montana, and Amsterdam in dead last. For the in-depth processes and all of my thoughts on those other brands, I have the playlist linked at the end of this video. Thank you guys for coming along while I create this little fiction. This ended up actually being one of my favorites from this entire series. If you'd like to continue following me on my journey, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon, and I will hopefully have the next one up tomorrow. If you are going to follow along, then I'll see you there.